Uh, I'm very grateful for your allowing me to interview, and we just talk freely each other. And I hope this occasion will enhance the mutual understanding between our two nations.
Well, it's a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to participate on your show.
And before entering the show, I prepared a small gift for you. My drawing, my own
beautiful.
drawing. Maybe your wife, I hope, will like it. But
well, she's an artist, but we both appreciate fine art. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. I hope you can like it. First of all, you are in Gwangju, and Gwangju is a very special place.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the people here has a very sad memory of their past. And I've heard that you went to the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
How was your feeling there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know the long history of Gwangju and the very tragic events that took place here 26 years ago. So for me, it was very important to go to the May 18th cemetery. Actually, it's my first stop on arrival in Gwangju. And I was very moved by the experience, to see the photographs of each of the victims on their graves, and even some of them who are still missing. Brought home the personal tragedy as well as the political significance of what happened here. But it also was, for me, important to remember that they didn't die in vain, because while they made the ultimate sacrifice, ultimately their struggle did help bring Korea to where it is today as a strong democracy, and even a model for other countries in the world. So it was a sad period in history. I know it's a sensitive point in Korean-American relations, but I'm very happy I went.
The May 18 event, I think the massacre of the people itself, I think we Koreans are primarily responsible for that sad events. But if I speak a little bit tough,
Please.
At that time, the airborne troops were infiltrated in the street, and then that's I think has nothing to do with combined forces command, but in the final stage of that event, they moved the 20th Infantry Division into the Gwangju streets, and that division cannot be moved without the permission of the U.S. command. And so, how do you think about this?
Well, I think the perception of the American role at the time was perhaps not quite accurate. There was a lot of manipulation by Chun Doo-hwan of information. When we made public statements that were published in the United States, he prevented them from being played on Korean TV, in which we expressed concern about the violence. We called for a dialogue rather than a violent solution. And in the case of the 20th Infantry Division, it was actually within the rights of the Korean government to withdraw its forces unilaterally. We didn't have the ability to veto or to give permission. It still led to tragic events, and obviously historians will be the ultimate judges of what happened. I certainly think that whatever we did at the time to press for democracy clearly was not enough. But as you said, the Korean authorities at the time did bear primary responsibility. And I'm only grateful that it didn't take too many years for the struggle for democracy to succeed in Korea. And we can now celebrate both the present and the future of Gwangju as a symbol of the determination of the Korean people to achieve freedom. And at least that's now something that unites our two countries, is a belief in freedom and democracy.
I think for the democratic achievements, I think we have the same opinion. There is no question about the progression of our history. But at least, at that time, the Koreans were, at least the Gwangju people were very desperate. They were killed. Very, 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 it was sad events. But they believed operation authority was in the hands of U.S. command. And for that, after that event, we believe you too easily admitted the Chun Doo-hwan government. So Gwangju people, I think you may persuade me, but at least Gwangju people are not persuaded. And that event, first of all, become a beginning of anti-American sentiment. So this is the epicenter of that, movement, that kind of sentiment, I say. So you have to say something about this.
No, I understand that's still the strongly held feeling here. And again, I think the historical record shows that our position was a bit different than what it appeared at the time. I recommend people take a look at the white paper we released in 1989, which is still on our embassy website, and it does provide through the declassified documents and records at the time that we were putting more pressure on Chun Doo-hwan than people thought. But, and of course, we did not have the total control over the Korean military under the 1978 agreements that set up the Combined Forces Command. Each side had the right to withdraw its forces just by making a notification. But that's the past. I think the important thing is that democracy is a reality today. I think, again, I leave it to the historians to decide whether the United States could have done more. Perhaps we could have done more, either at the time or in the next couple of years when the military dictatorship consolidated its power. But I'm here to honor those who gave their lives, but also to celebrate the very positive relationship we now have, and the fact that our countries are united by democracy in a way that makes this a very special relationship. So I don't know if that will satisfy all your listeners. I don't know if it satisfies you, but
actually, I was very shocked that you accepted our offer to, have this kind of dialogue, because usually American ambassadors were so strict. So I think they haven't shown such a amicable and such a soft gesture as you are now doing. So I'm very happy that I try to actually help the mutual understanding. But I may be a little bit tougher.
I'm your guest. You have the privilege of being the host.
The Korean, especially people, have been, for example, in 1945, after liberation, American army came. And at that time, they really didn't fully understand the Korean situation. I think America was not really prepared. And to govern this society after the colonial period. And so at that time, I think America also made a lot of mistakes because, a person like me who speaks good English, educated in the United States, have a Christian background. And then I think you judge, Korean situation, few people through those guys.
Mm-hmm.
So they were actually didn't understand the real situation there. And so actually we believe such a misunderstanding eventually caused the spirit between our within our nation, and then that led eventually to the Korean War. And it's a historical. I'm talking about not the responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a big stream I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the Gwangju, massacre. That event also we thought American didn't do enough, and then now America talks about, for example, human rights problem in the North Korea. Then the people, at least in Gwangju, will not be persuaded that America didn't help us in the time of crisis, and now in the pretext of the human rights problem in the North, you are doing some economic blockade, and that's, they think, only unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've raised a lot of issues in posing a single question. Going back to the period right after the war, I would agree with you that there may well have been some mistakes made, which contributed to the events that led to the Korean War. I think that obviously it was a reflection of the reality on the ground when we somewhat blithely drew the border at the 38th parallel because Russian or Soviet troops had moved in the final weeks of the war. And as you said, people didn't have too much understanding of the Korean situation. We were focused so exclusively on winning the war against Japan that some of these details of the post-war occupation may not have been fully thought through. And we may well have given encouragement to Kim Il-sung and to Stalin, who ultimately, I believe, gave the green light for the Korean War, as the archives now show. We may have given the impression that we weren't ready to defend South Korea. Fortunately, they were wrong, and we did come to your defense. But again, historians will have to continue to assess those facts. Yeah. But looking at the present situation with North Korea, we very much want to engage with North Korea. We want to help the people of North Korea who have been suffering for many years, many of them even starving to death. And we've been trying now for more than 10 years to develop a normal relationship with that country. We thought we had started a positive process in 1994 with the agreed framework, but the North Koreans violated that agreement. They also basically rejected many offers that we made at the time for establishing offices in each other's capitals and moving to normalization of relations. Now we're at a very difficult stage of the six-party talks. The North Koreans are boycotting the negotiations. But it's a misperception to say that we have set up a wall of economic sanctions against North Korea, or that we're waging economic warfare against North Korea. We took action against one bank in Macau because it was being exploited for money laundering and other illegal activities. But we remain ready to negotiate. We've explained what the North Koreans need to do to address our concerns about counterfeiting, but they seem to be more interested in self-isolation than in negotiation. So I hope the situation changes, but we do believe that what South Korea is doing in trying to engage the North, to encourage reforms that can improve the lives of the people, introduce the principles of the free market. Those are all good things, and North Korea is missing many opportunities to engage with us, with Japan, with others, by refusing to come back to the six-party talks.
As for North Koreans, what they want is the admittance of their present political system or their value system they pursue. So, but President Bush have a tendency to define as an evil axis or still just the bad guys. But between us, I mean, those Korean people, still our brothers and our parents and all is our family. So from other family blame my Clifford brother, he's weak and and so it's very sad for us. So I think, for example, rather than even so you said one bank, maybe it's a crucial blockade for them. So rather than doing that, I hope you have more open mind to embrace North Korea. Then it can help the North Korean goes to the side of to the party of the to China, because they heavily depend upon China. So China and Russia and North Korea become one party, and here Japan, Korea, America become one party. Then our country will split again. This is our thing. I mean, we have this kind of worry.
Yeah. I certainly understand the emotional feeling about the divided nation and the desire to bring the North Koreans back into the family. I think President Bush, he feels tremendous sympathy for the terrible fate that the North Korean people have suffered because they have a system that doesn't work. It can't feed the population. The economy is stagnant. There's really no economic progress. Infrastructure is disintegrating. So, and it's not because of any blockade. It's because of the inability of the system to produce the kinds of results that every other country in this region is achieving. China, which is no democracy, but China at least has reformed its economy and is providing great prosperity to its people. So we would very much like to see an improvement there, and we're not trying to overthrow the regime, as some people think. The regime may not be working very well, but we're prepared to negotiate with it. We're prepared to work on the basis of the September agreement in the six-party talks, which is based on the principle of reciprocity. They will disarm, and we will work to help them to establish a permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula, to normalize our relationship. So there are opportunities for the regime in Pyongyang to improve its situation through negotiations. And we think it would be better for that regime if it introduced reforms. If you look at what happened in Russia or in Hungary or even in China, without economic reforms, the rule of law, greater opportunities and respect for the rights of citizens, the society will go backwards, not forwards. But we'd like to convince them through persuasion that it's time for them to adopt reforms. And it's too bad they're not listening.
But their system is, as you say, is not. The whole social system is not really working. There's no question about it. But that is a very special, still very special system.
That's for sure.
Actually, one man has such a huge power. So I hope you more understand their special, all kinds of socio-political structure. So you have to persuade that man
No, I know. It's not
to
easy.
change the attitude in society and give the more friendly gesture and to just placate them. I mean, to not only try, to say bad, but you're good people, and so let them change by their own will. I mean, this is.
Well, that's certainly what we hope can happen. I mean, we saw this happen in the former Soviet Union, which I'm more of an expert about than about North Korea. But they had a totalitarian system with power concentrated in the hands of a very small circle of people who were more interested in their own privileges than in the welfare of the people. But eventually the contradictions in the system were recognized by people like Gorbachev and some of his other allies, and they started to reform the system from within. I don't know if there's a North Korean Gorbachev. I hope so. But we should certainly be all encouraging the North Korean leadership to think about its own future. The longer it resists reform, the more the internal contradictions of the system will become stronger. And no one wants to see a collapse. We want to see a peaceful transformation of the society towards a more prosperous and free country. It will take time. It's not going to happen overnight. But I think our two countries share the same objectives. And I think if we can encourage the beginning of change in North Korea, it will actually help the process of unification. I think it'll be much easier to see the two Koreas come together in a more comprehensive way if they're beginning to live under the same system of values. It's hard to see a merger of the two systems right now.
But the word you said, collapse, very important. We hope the North Korean system still, it has its own momentum and usefulness, and they have to change within their system primarily, not collapsing them. So for that matter, I think still should help them.
Well, again, I'm not sure the system is very useful, but it exists. We accept that it exists, and I think we would like to see an evolutionary process of change rather than collapse. Collapse would be a very dangerous proposition for the whole world, but especially for South Korea. But the question is, how can we get through to the leaders? We're ready for a real dialogue. Even though the six-party talks have not been meeting for the last 4 or 5 months, we've been doing a lot of work in Washington involving Secretary of State Rice, all the cabinet level people, to think about how can we really have a different relationship with North Korea. But it takes two to tango. They have to come back to the table, and then we can get to work.
And maybe one more tough question.
Okay.
I'm teasing you. Or the present incumbent issue is the Korea-U.S. FTA, and there's a lot of people here are concerned, especially the masses, the farmers, and of course the economic bureaucrats wants very fast agreements. But I myself think it is not so desirable to proceed this negotiation fast track.
Well, I think that we've been talking about these issues for a long time, even though we only announced the negotiations in February. So I think that a solution can be found by next spring that is balanced, that addresses the main concerns of both sides. We have to proceed rather quickly because on the American side, we have authority from the Congress to negotiate an FTA that expires on the 1st of July of 2007. So if you want to have an FTA during the Bush administration, you basically need to accept the reality of this timetable. But the benefits for both countries are very, very, very great. And I think the business community in both countries is very enthusiastic about the FTA. People say that the gross domestic product of Korea will increase by 2%, that more than 400,000 jobs will be created in the manufacturing industries and in services. There'll be more American investment coming here. So I think the overall benefits are pretty clear. Certainly some sectors may feel that they will be disadvantaged by the FTA. There's some parts of the American economy that are very nervous about the FTA as well, our car industry, for example. So we'll have to find compromises on some of these sensitive issues. For example, some of the opening of the market can be done in stages rather than all at once to give time for particular sectors to adapt. Or President Roh Moo-hyun has announced a big package for reform of agriculture so he can help the farmers become more competitive or to shift from one crop to another crop where they can be more competitive. So there are solutions. I don't think we're hurrying too much, but this is the hurry society, so I think our negotiators are skillful enough to finish the job and find solutions that both of our parliaments can accept.
The whole point here is mutual selling, free selling of manufactured goods, that kind of things, no problem. But it will be decided upon mutual agreements. But what people worries is that agreement can undermine, disintegrate our social system. For example, we have for example, health insurance, the whole national insurance system, which is working very well. Guarantee rate is a little bit lower than the European standard, but it's very working well. But they try to, then FTA will say that it changes into private profit organization. Then it undermines the whole insurance system. And at least, for example, it's one sample. So American insurance system, at least, is not working very well. Mrs. Clinton, tried to reform it, but 14% of the United States citizens don't have medical insurance, and these kind of things, the people will define it as a sort of investment barrier, and then it just changes our social system. That's why we are concerned.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's going to happen. An FTA will open up markets, but it doesn't literally integrate our health insurance system. So you will continue to have your system, which I agree is very successful, and we will have ours. There may be specific issues such as regulation of the pharmaceutical industry, which will be a complex issue for the FTA, because our drug companies think that the Korean regulators are too quick to allow generic versions of very expensive new drugs to be manufactured before the inventor has time to recover his investment in the research and development. So that's going to be an issue, how to deal with pharmaceutical products. But the whole healthcare system is not going to be undermined by the FTA. And I think other services sectors which have been raised, such as the education service sector, are ones where more openness probably is possible, but we'll have to find a balanced solution. Again, you have negotiators who are listening to the public debate, just as our negotiators are listening to our public debate. So they know how far they can go, and there will be proposals that we make that you will reject, and there'll be proposals that you make that we will reject. That's what negotiations are all about. But I think we can find the happy medium that will benefit both countries.
Here we, first of all, I'm very grateful that you accepted this. Another ambassador of the Gwangju Biennale, and the fever. They said the present year, this year, the theme is fever variations. Have you seen something in the Biennale exhibition?
Yeah, well, first I'm happy that we're both goodwill ambassadors. Desanim. I'd had the opportunity to visit the Biennale site to see what an impressive facility that they have for this exhibition, and to hear a little bit about the plans for this year's Biennale. I'm very excited that there's going to be 11 American artists among the many international artists there. And I don't fully understand the theme of fever variations, but I understand there'll be some very interesting, cutting-edge artists from different parts of Asia, and that there will be some emphasis to show the links in some of the artistic trends in different countries of Asia. So since Asia is sort of the hottest part of the world in industry and e-commerce, it's clearly becoming the hottest region in the arts too. So I'm very excited. I can't wait to actually see the exhibits in September.
I think they said the fever is kind of, Asiatic values, like a fever can, transmitted to other countries, and can contribute to the peace of the world. And how do you feel about Asiatic value or Asiatic maybe artistic sense, or do you have any special thing?
Well, I certainly know that I've been very impressed the more I get familiar with the artistic trends here in Korea, where it's fascinating to see the continued reverence for the old traditions, whether it's in terms of porcelain or the patchwork cloths, the wrapping cloths, and traditional dress, but also the inventiveness of the modern artists and how they blend the old and the new. And I think that's happening in other parts of Asia as well. So I'm very excited. I think a lot is made of the difference between Asian values and Western values. I personally don't think people are all that different. I think that I find in Korea, the concern about family and about education, and respect for your elders, something at least we strive to achieve in America too. Our kids didn't always respect us, but that was supposed to be the guiding principle.
So you're very positive about our Confucian values, huh?
I think so. They've had a positive influence. People say they're maybe not as honored by the youngest generation as they used to be, but I'm certainly a believer.
I've heard your wife is a very great artist, huh? And the metal, jewel designer.
Indeed.
Would you introduce something?
Well, I always wear her cufflinks.
Oh.
And but she's been doing jewelry since she was a teenager.
Oh.
And
teenager.
And when
she's from the Boston. Huh?
We're both from Boston. We've been together, going together since we were both 16.
Oh.
We've been married, it'll be 30 years this June.
Oh.
But she's found that being an artist is a very good match for a diplomat because it's work that you can take anywhere in the world. And she's found that each place we've lived has had some influence on her designs. She tends to do things that are fairly bold and modern and using bold geometric shapes and lots of color. So in Russia, there were a lot of connections drawn between her work and the Russian avant-garde artists of the 1920s and 30s. So now maybe some Korean forms will creep into her work.
We have a great tradition, and she will find many interesting things. And she has any plan to have an exhibition?
Well, she's been very fortunate to already have several group exhibitions in Seoul, and in June, first half of June, she'll have a solo exhibition at the Sun Gallery in Insadong. So she's been working very hard to produce something like 100 different pieces of jewelry, and also she does some decorative objects that, like baskets and the like, and lamps. So she's very engaged here already in her work, and she's already met lots of counterparts from the contemporary jewelry world. So she's ready to settle in Korea for a long time.
Do you have any religious belief?
Well, both my wife and I are Jewish by background, and we've raised our children with Jewish education.
Jewish education.
We're both of what's called the Reform Jewish tradition, so more liberal, not orthodox. But religion has been, I think, an important factor in our family over the years.
Why do Jewish people have so much talented people? How that kind of tradition is raised? I mean,
well, I think we sometimes say this as a joke, but I think it's true that Jewish mothers are a lot like Korean mothers. They're very determined to ensure that their children get the best education, that they really explore every possibility, take music lessons to see if they're talented as musics, or take art lessons or dance class. Maybe we'll have a virtuoso. So I think there's an encouragement from an early age to explore your potential, which I've seen here among Koreans as well. So I think Jews have had a difficult history, but especially in America, where they were accepted as part of our multicultural melting pot. Jews have taken advantage of the many opportunities, just as so many Korean Americans have done.
Do you have any opinion about this Dokdo problem of our Japan and Korea feud?
Well, we're glad that the recent crisis seems to have been resolved, or at least diffused by direct negotiations. We congratulate the diplomats in that regard. On a specific issue, we have always taken a neutral position on the legal aspects of the Tokdo or Takashima dispute. We even use a different word for the islands to underscore our neutrality. We call it the Liancourt Rocks. But we do hope that the negotiations that were agreed for next month on the economic zones will be successful, because it's not a happy situation for us to see two close allies who are very important partners in the world. We're both strong democracies. To have these kinds of quarrels over historical issues. So we hope that further efforts by diplomats will prevent another crisis from developing over Tokdo.
Actually, Tokdo problem was appear in Japanese history only after 1905. after the Japanese-Russian War, and before that, we already from the maps 300 years old maps already shows clearly that as our territory. But the only pretext is in 1945 when they returned Korea to our people, to our nation. We didn't clearly state Ulleungdo, but didn't say that Dokdo. But it's just, I think it's nonsense. I mean,
well, I know more about the history of this dispute than I care to know, and it's a very complex issue, and the legal issues are complex, and the United States has looked at the situation and has come to the conclusion that it has no opinion on the who's right and who's wrong when it comes to the legal position.
Even international justice is only for the strong, not for the weak. So we are very, for that matter, always.
Well, I think Korea is a very strong country right now.
No. It's very weak.
Well, you have a very impressive economy, a very strong military, strong society. I think I would say you don't sell yourself short.
These days, I'm very pessimistic about our future, and I want to retire. I want to live in a small cottage in the country. And generally, how was your impression of Korean society in general? Your experience with the Korean people and Korean society?
Well, I think I'm not unique among Americans who feel very impressed by what Korea has achieved. I mean, just to compare the backwardness of your economy 30 or 40 years ago, and the dynamism and the wealth that you've achieved, and the spirit of entrepreneurship that is really well established here. That, together with the now very impressive cultural achievements with the Korean Wave taking over Asia, and you even have Rain singing at Madison Square Garden. Korean films are more and more winning the awards in the festivals. So Korea is definitely a country that's on the rise, and Americans feel that Korean society, with its strong family traditions and your strong democratic institutions, is also something that you should be proud of, and as we frequently say, is a real model for other countries. So maybe it's foreigners who have a more detached perspective can see the more of the positive things than Koreans themselves. I don't know.
I think for our discussion today, I should have been tougher. But you're a professional diplomat, and I have to respect your position. And so I hope you can remember one thing, that you may persuade me because I speak English and I understand your humanitarian value system as a person. I feel very homogeneous, but you may not persuade our masses. I mean, those you listen here in this country, and I try to represent the voices of the people, the masses. They're poor, and they are really unhappy. There are many unhappy situations here. So, don't listen only to economic bureaucrats or Nomian's close friends.
Okay, well, no, I appreciate that advice, and I know that you have to get around the country, talk to people at every level, the students or people working in many different professions, to get a better understanding of what really bothers Koreans and what's what are their hopes and their dreams for the future. So it's a big job.
Yeah.
I have to make sure that I don't spend all my time in my office in Seoul. And so your advice is very wise, and I appreciate that.
This kind of outing, I mean, you came out and very, very impressive. And I've heard you do very good drum. Huh?
Well, that's when the stress gets too high. I like to play rock and roll. And today in Gwangju, I also had the chance to take a short lesson in traditional Korean drumming, which is much more physically demanding.
More physically.
I think I'm going to have to do more aerobic exercise to get in shape for Korean drumming, but it was a lot of fun.
I'm also musician. I do a lot of traditional music, and I'm now learning jazz piano. So someday I hope
we'll have to do a jam session sometime.
We can do some jam session.
That would be great.
I hope this kind of our encounter will enhance, our mutual understanding, and I think our image of American ambassador was such a grandiose and authoritative, but you showed a totally different picture today. I appreciate very much, and you are very honest. And I have been actually more keen, tougher, but I was persuaded.
Okay, well.
But I hope you can, do more real progressive demand of the people, and especially North and South relationship. This peaceful relationship and further development is very, very important. I hope.
Well, for me, that's among the most important parts of my job. I did have the privilege to work on all the changes in Europe when the Soviet Union broke up, and we took a divided Europe and brought it together. And there'd be nothing more exciting for me than to contribute, even in a small way, to bringing the two Koreas together. This is first and foremost for the Korean people on both sides of the border to deal with. But if I can help, and if my country can help, we really want that to happen. People may have gotten the impression when I first got here that the only thing I cared about was counterfeiting of money by North Korea. But we have a policy that's aimed at trying to improve the lives of the North Korean people and to help with the unification of the Korean nation. And I just only wish we could see those negotiations begin so we could make some progress in that regard.
Actually, when we heard the news that you are coming, we expected a lot. That you are so competent man and a very important man. So America think Korea very important country, but
well, it is a very important country.
When you made some comments, a lot of people were a little bit disappointed. But maybe today you recovered much.
Well, okay. If that's your conclusion, I won't argue with you.
Maybe we maybe communicate too endlessly, and we have to end up here.
Okay.
And thank you for your coming to the stage.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to have a very interesting conversation.
Oh, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.